There's hardly ever a time in the garden when there isn't an iris blooming, and this one reminded me of, this is Iris unguicularis. It's not in bloom now, but they often start blooming at Thanksgiving and bloom into early March. So it covers like most of the winter months, and there are other little winter blooming iris like Iris reticulata, and then others sort of keep on blooming through the 12 months of the year. To go down here. All right. I might get up here. The bearded iris are maybe the best known of all iris. They get their name because the little beard that always reminds me more of a caterpillar on the falls. In an iris, the floral parts, you have the standards, which are the parts that go up. They're less pronounced on some species than others. And then the three petals that are downward, generally downward, which are called the falls. There's other parts, but standards and falls are the main parts of the flower. The bearded iris are sun lovers, but in our climate that does not need to have sun all day long. If they have at least 6 hours of sun, you'll have good bloom. They are very drought tolerant. They will go through our worst droughts. If it's really dry, the foliage gets a little bit shabbier than normal. But they want a well-drained soil, so not a soggy spot. We're going to see a lot of iris today that love wet, but the bearded irises are not suitable for a soggy spot. And nowadays, a big focus of iris breeding is on repeat bloom. So you have the main bloom in this, well, it's not necessarily even the main bloom, but they bloom at the normal time this time of year. But then the repeat bloomers will repeat again later on in the summer and into the fall. There are lots and lots of selections. Some are good at repeating in one climate, but not so much in another. So you talk to somebody who's growing bearded irises and find out which ones perform well in your own area. This is an example of a tall bearded iris. There are about 5 or 6 classes of bearded iris, from miniature bearded iris to standard dwarf bearded iris to median iris to dwarf. I don't even remember all the names. So it's like it just stepped up from one size to the other. But the littlest ones, bloomed at least a month ago. So, but the bearded iris is sort of the last of the bearded iris to bloom in the spring. Any questions on that?
How those seem to be bunched together. At what point do you kind of break up the rhizomes and transplant them elsewhere and give them more space?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's one that applies particularly to bearded iris, because some of them stop blooming when they get too crowded. And so maybe every 3 to 5 years, if they're growing vigorously, you should dig them up, divide them. And a lot of people who only want like one clump will only replant the big rhizomes and either compost the smaller ones or give them away, because all those small ones, in given time and good care, will eventually be blooming size. So every 3 to 5 years. And everything people write about bearded irises, to plant the rhizome at the surface of the soil. I think in our hot sun, the rhizomes like a little bit of soil or mulch on top of them. But do not overdo mulch with bearded irises that holds a lot of moisture. We use triple shredded hardwood mulch, which I don't like, because it holds a lot of moisture, and for a plant that doesn't like to be wet, it's not the best mulch. You know, use whatever Mother Nature gives you, the leaves off your trees or pine needles and stuff. But a light mulch would help to keep down weeds. We'll continue on. Oh. It's pretty. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, well, you know. I'm not sure I know how the names are, the scientific names anyway.
What about dividing Louisiana iris?
We'll talk about Louisiana iris in a moment. Yeah.
Aren't the buds pretty?
I wasn't expecting to see a Japanese iris. These are the very first ones. I was not expecting to see Japanese irises. This is the very first flower and not even quite open yet, but the Japanese iris are real beauties, and they are clump formers. When we meet the Louisiana iris in a moment, we'll see that they're runners. The Louisiana iris are towards the end of the main iris season, and really worthwhile. They don't have to have a wet spot, but I would avoid a dry spot. As long as it's sort of average moisture, you'll do really well. And the color range is sort of blue, violet, pink, and white, and some combination of the two.
Did you say that was Louisiana?
No, Japanese. Yeah, and well, we'll take a few steps here. All right, we'll go here. The Louisiana hybrid iris, and we walked past a real ugly one there. Well, see, every time I point out some modern hybrid of a plant, whether it be a daylily or an iris that I think is so horrendous, everyone else says, I like it. So I was once told I am not part of the demographic. So yeah. Obviously Japanese iris is from Japan, or at least Asia in a broader sense. But the Louisiana iris, or the Louisiana hybrid iris, are derived from 5 native species. This one is the outlier because this one has a very widespread distribution. This is Iris brevicalis, which means short stem. Its flower stalk's not much taller than the stem I cut this morning, so it's a short thing in the garden. And it occurs all the way up the Mississippi River, whereas the other 4 species primarily occur in the lower drainage of the Mississippi River. Some of them are native only to Louisiana, but most of them are more widely spread. And I should say the typical color of Iris brevicalis is a nice clear blue. This is a sort of more violet selection. This guy is a really important parent. This is giganticaerulea, meaning the giant blue iris. And my ones at home are, they're sort of eye level. So it's a great big thing. I'm going to get rid of these. Does somebody want them? Sure, thanks, Kyle. Now this little guy is Iris fulva. Fulva means rusty orange. It's the same specific epithet as the tawny daylily that you see along the roadside, Hemerocallis fulva. And you know, the other parents are all blues or blue violets, but this one with the rusty orange flowers contributes a very different color. This guy looks a lot like, oh, look at that. These look slightly different than those. This is Iris nelsonii, which is sort of, well, it's thought to be a natural hybrid. Natural hybrid meaning something that the bees did, not a human did. So it occurs in just one parish in Louisiana. Very limited distribution, and it has been a parent of some of the hybrids. So you take these 5 species and cross them, and you come up with you know, an incredible range of colors amongst the Louisiana iris. Now, everyone know the derivation of the word iris? The goddess of the rainbow, because of the wide range of colors. A lot of plant names are taken from mythology. So, you know, this is one Louisiana iris. I think that's Professor Paul. You know, this is another one. That's one. That yellow one is one. And whereas the bearded irises, I wouldn't describe them as running, they just slowly get wider. This is all one Louisiana iris, probably planted as one plant. And 2 summers ago, we completely dug it up. We threw away the old parts of the rhizome and just planted the best ones. And you know, the Louisiana iris are really vigorous spreaders. They don't have to have a wet spot, but they absolutely love wet. You see, they have chosen to spread out into standing water. So if you have a pond, it's a great plant for the edge of a pond. If you have a teeny tiny garden, or maybe you just have a courtyard garden, maybe not the best plant for them for a small garden, but they're really good. One thing most of the wild parents of the Louisiana hybrids occur in woodlands, but they are deciduous woodlands that tend to be flooded in the winter. So they have sun and they have moisture in the winter, and then by the time they come into bloom, the trees have leafed out. It's no longer sunny. Over the course of the summer, the woodlands dry out. And if you have grown Louisiana iris, maybe you feel that their foliage looks pretty shabby come summer. Well, that's because the plants are almost dormant then. And by late summer, or maybe even before, you'll notice they start putting up new foliage already. So at that point, we strip off all the foliage that you see today and leave just the new shoots, because the old foliage gets worse as summer wears on. And then, you know, we have a lot less volume of foliage, but what we leave is the foliage that's going to go through the next winter and bloom the next spring. So, you know, if you want to tidy up your Louisiana iris, that's what we do. And we're just working with the natural rhythm of the plant.
How often should you divide them in order to promote bloom?
They really don't get crowded because they're spreading so fast. You see there's a lot of gaps between them, whereas the bearded iris we started off with, they sort of just put more amongst what's already there, so they do get congested, but these don't get congested. But you know, all these old stems, we dug them up in order to revitalize them, got rid of all the old, and it wasn't a matter of congestion, it was just a matter of sort of cleaning them up. But you know, bearded irises probably benefit from division more than most other iris. You know, that's a selection of one of our native iris versicolor. Cultivar is John Wood, and it makes a big clump, but it doesn't slow down. It doesn't really bother it that it gets really dense. Iris robusta is a natural hybrid between two East Coast natives, Iris versicolor and Iris virginica, and we'll see virginica in the next garden. This is dark aura. Yeah, the foliage in the spring when it first comes up is fairly highly suffused with purple. There are a number of irises that have that feature, but the stems are still dark at the time it blooms. It's loving this wet spot, but you can grow it in an average garden provided it's not an excessively dry spot. Yeah, dark aura. Yeah. I think we won't fight the crowds, but as you go through the garden after the class, I think John Wood is a real pretty thing. We'll head this way while we can. What am I carrying? The Louisiana iris often do blue really, really well. This is Sinfonetia, lovely blue. Further on, I don't remember that one's name, it's sort of rusty red and yellow. It's you can, whatever color you want, you basically can get it. Down this way, you see another Louisiana iris with sort of red-violet flowers. Oh my goodness, this was prettier yesterday. This is a hybrid, it's George Davidson. I have to think that one of its parent is the the European yellow water iris, Iris pseudacorus, which is something probably we shouldn't plant at all. We eliminated it from the garden a couple years ago because the wild yellow water iris produces a huge amount of seeds. Every one germinates about 3 times over. And if it ever gets in the wild, like around a pond or something, you'll end up with seedlings all around the pond. And Tom's shaking his head, yes, you've probably seen that do it up in the Northeast, because I did.
No, in my garden.
Oh, okay. Okay. So this hybrid gives you the beautiful yellow flowers of Iris pseudacorus, but in a sterile plant, it doesn't make any seedlings. Similar hybrid, but a different color. This is Holden's child. And an example of our native iris virginica. This is sort of blue-violet is the typical color. There are white selections and pink selections. Fairly handsome foliage plant. The foliage looks good all year round. And this is a high, raised bed up on a slope with our well-drained soil, and it's thriving, but you could also grow it in standing water, so they're adaptable.
Would you say which one this was again?
It's Iris virginica, okay. Our native blue flag. I don't know if this has a cultivar name. I don't think this has the label.
They use that in stormwater wetlands and wet ponds.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot. Yeah, it's a great plant for that. And we had that big ditch that we try to plant just natives because otherwise we get in trouble. And so that's a great plant for a wet site. And this, if erosion is a problem, that plant does a good job of holding the soil. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard blue flag rang a bell.
Yeah. Let's see, we'll go this way. Oh, this is a really odd Louisiana iris. I think this was wild collected. It's a much smaller flower than the modern hybrids, and people have only been breeding Louisiana hybrids since about the 1940s. But this is I never know how to I don't know how to pronounce that word. That bayou, the wet boggy areas in the Louisiana. But this is bayou. Yeah, but I'm trying to remember the second part of the name. Yeah, bandit, bayou bandit, and it's just this sort of ghostly color. And you see here it's a shady location, but it would be full sun in the winter. My goodness, we had 1.5 inches of rain last night and there's not standing water in here. That's surprising. But odd little thing. Oh, another Louisiana hybrid. The rain last night was hard. I knew it was hard because when I came in this morning there was bark washed out on paths and bark paths washed out. And so the hard rain last night was not kind on these bearded iris. But this is one, it's going past its spring peak, but this is one that's in full bloom again probably in October and early November. Now that our frosts are so much later, we used to always get a frost. I always thought of it as during the State Fair week, the middle of October. Now it's like Thanksgiving or so before we have a frost. So these repeat blooming irises perform even better because they're not stopped short by a frost in mid-October. This is, I believe, Harvest of Memories. That's one that's fairly readily available. Clarence is one that I see a lot for sale in garden centers. It has blue falls and white standards. It's one that repeats really well in the fall.
Now, is it necessary to like prune them and take the dead stuff off, or just leave it like that until they finish blooming? I also grow roses, so that's why I always think about pruning.
No, it's a very valid question. The plant doesn't care.
Okay.
But yes, you can clean it up to improve its appearance. I love daylilies, and I'm always tempted to go through these gardens and deadhead them before our visitors come in, but the plant doesn't care. But yeah, it would look a whole lot better if we cleaned it up. And when they're done blooming, we certainly will cut the whole flower stalk off as low as we can.
That's what I...
Yeah.
Because there's like a bug, a borer that likes to go in there or something if you don't cut this flower stem off?
Well, I don't know that has any effect on the borers. Maybe, I just don't know. But iris borers can be a serious pest. They're a good size, almost pinky size grub that eats the rhizomes underground from the inside. If you notice the plants falling over and stuff, check the rhizomes. Now, some bearded irises have really lousy foliage. I would tend to eliminate them from the garden because you can find others where the foliage remains fairly clean through the summer. They're fairly untidy plants. Like, there's always seems like there's old foliage to clean up if you want them to remain presentable. Oh, thank you. That also reminded me, I love iris. I don't ever want an iris garden because then when they're out of bloom, you have just this huge mass of unattractive foliage. So they're better mixed in with other things. So when this is not showy, the sedum is blooming or the grass is being pretty. So, that's not a rule, it's just my thinking and a suggestion. This plant reminds me, I want to show you an example of a Spuria iris because that's a group of irises that are very little grown. Anybody want some Velcro weed? Yeah, I found the last weed.
Oh, we got... Whoa, this goes off in one whole thing.
Yeah, it's a winter annual, so it doesn't have much of a root. And it was the inspiration for Velcro.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's wonderful. You throw it on somebody's back without them knowing, and then they go through the rest of the day wearing it.
Darn.
If you have a dog or a cat with a silky coat, when the seed ripens, they'll get stuck in their fur, and that is, to me, the worst part of the plant. Yeah, but it's a really easily controlled weed. But we'll head down this way to the Spuria iris. Oh, okay. Oh, good. I forgot about the Siberian iris. That's a really good class of iris. That, well, yeah, I don't, so many breeders always want to make things short. I always want to cut them off at their knee level and make them short. There's no reason to make a plant shorter, in my mind. It's good for the nursery trade because you see how plants come in on racks. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's easier to put that on a rack than a Siberian iris that's this tall. But in gardens, they don't need to be shorter. I once fussed at a daylily breeder for breeding short daylilies, and they said, well, gardens are getting smaller. And I instantly said, without thinking, well, gardens aren't getting shorter. But this seems to be one that they're trying to make double. And, you know, well, again, I'm not part of the demographic. I want a flower to look like what it's supposed to look like, not like a crumpled wad of toilet paper. I'm not opinionated about anything. Yeah.
Is that one plant?
Yes. Yes.
That's
yes.
one plant.
Yes. Some of them are real vigorous, and when it's done blooming, I'm going to reduce it because it's starting to sit on some of the neighbors. We're talking about the Jerusalem sage with the yellow flowers. They're like rosemary and lavender, where the plants aren't that long-lived, but they sort of sprawl out and the new stems root into the ground, so they make new plants.
Okay.
They're worthwhile, but you sometimes have to rein them in. That's a pretty nice penstemon with blue flowers, don't you think? Oh, that's Iris giganticaerulea. You see, one of the parents of the Louisiana iris. You see, it's a big thing. Oh, this is a treat. This is an iris I've not seen anywhere else but here. I don't know anything about it other than I assume it's Asian because the cultivar is Shanghai. Iris speculatrix. You know, you should have seen my garden yesterday. It was this was really spectacular, but don't gardeners always say that? This is, I'll wait for the group to come up. This is a representative of another group of iris, the Spuria iris, S-P-U-R-I-A. This is one of the parent species. This is Iris halophila. They are one that are extremely drought tolerant, and they would not be happy in a soggy spot at all. And they're almost never planted in this area. You're not going to find them in a garden center. For one thing, they're difficult in a pot. Super easy if you just plant them in the ground. But there's plenty of mail order sources where you can find a wide selection of them. This is sort of average height. There's some that are, you know, closer to 5 feet tall. There are also other shorter species, but a whole range of and they come in almost a complete range of colors, you know, blues and violets. Yellows and sort of rusty browns are really common as well. The foliage is really tough. It's largely evergreen, but their wild parents are native to the Middle East, but perfectly good in gardens here.
And what was the name of this group?
Spuria, S-P-U-R-I-A.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Why would you grow them as opposed to another iris? What's the difference?
It's a valid question. I showed you a bunch of iris that love wet spots, but maybe your garden you're dealing with the opposite end of the spectrum where you need plants that are very drought tolerant. I just bought a house and I'm determined to not plant much that I have to water on a regular basis. And it's very similar soil to here because it's really near here. And so I think this is a plant I could plant and not have to water. And, you know, maybe you don't like white and yellow, but it comes in a wide range of colors. You know, is that enough of an answer? Okay.
Could it handle part sun?
This is part sun.
Yeah, sounds
Yeah. This is, well, that's east in the summer. You know, it's getting sun for like half the day, and then it's behind the trees again. So yeah, they would certainly thrive in full sun, but the half day sun is good
I've
enough.
got a very dry yard, and I was really sad to hear about all the other irises that I can't grow.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad I remembered to show this one. Yeah, the bearded irises, you know, are certainly very drought tolerant. And, you know, there was somebody coming to Savannah, moving to Savannah, brought his iris collection, planted them out in absolute full sun. Did you know the bamboo station is a public garden now? Planted it out in full sun, added lots of organic matter and chicken manure, and they all promptly rotted. Well, I think the combination of essentially planting them and actively composting compost and the heat of the full sun, he rotted all his iris. I lived in Georgia for 3 years, a coastal plain of Georgia, and where you saw old irises blooming was in part sun, where they weren't baking out in the sun all day. You know, when somebody in the Northeast writes about something needing full sun all day, they don't understand that our sun is so much hotter. I have my little rental house. I have my daylily collection in the backyard. There's not a single tree in the backyard, but it's overhung by trees on all three sides. So there's a little window of sun, and my daylilies bloom really well with less than 6 hours of sun.
Good, that's inspiring.
Yeah. I think that will be our iris tour. Gives you, well, this little guy is just finishing up. The little iris graminea. It's supposed to smell like plums, but I don't think it's fresh enough to bother. You were asking about Salvia farinacea, a non-iris. But you know, this is in our soil without gravel, so it doesn't need sharp drainage.
Moisture soil. And this is farinacea?
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's pull the label out. If it's hidden,
Texas
it's no good.
violet. Okay.
Yeah.
I will go look for that.
Yeah, they're superb plants.
And that Dulberg would be similar.
Yeah, and Dulberg would be big like this. The one over by the welcome tent is a more compact one. All right. Well, here's another example of a bearded iris.
Yeah, they cut their.
Well, I think that'll be our tour today. Thank you for coming out. Well, Lord, thank you. Happy to answer questions, but otherwise I think I'll move on.
Thank you.